Henry Ford was raised Episcopalian and believed in God, but he doesn't appear to have spent a great deal of time thinking about it. He said religion, like everything else, is a thing that should be kept working. He said, I see no use in spending a great deal of time learning about heaven and hell. In my opinion, a man makes his own heaven and hell and carries it around with him. Now, both of them are states of mind.
So like a curious traveler on a quest, we embark upon a journey of information. Stay with us for a ride into knowledge.
When he was 26, he discovered the concept of reincarnation, which made more sense to him than anything the Episcopalians were talking about. Now, he didn't completely ditch the Christian theology, but incorporated reincarnation into his faith. Ford's real passion lay less in his embrace of Christianity or reincarnation, but in his hatred of the chosen ones. In fact, his passion was detailed in a series of writings under his name called The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem. His writings prompted Hitler to call Henry Ford his inspiration. And in fact, Hitler kept a life-size portrait of the American automaker next to his desk. Now, despite his prejudice, Henry Ford's legacy in the United States is as a great entrepreneur, capitalist, and a friend of the middle class. Ford was a leading welfare capitalist who doubled wages in 1914 in an effort to reduce turnover and to create a loyal and more productive workforce. But he only offered that $5 a day wage thing to workers who passed inspections into their private lives, regarding, among other things, cleanliness of their homes, regular bank deposits, and their children's school attendance records. He was also an enemy of unions. He so resisted the unionizing of his employees that he sent out thugs to attack organizers. He was more concerned that those who financed the war were just looking to make a profit at the expense of human life. Now, although he did not officially align with either political party, his prominence as a successful industrialist prompted President Woodrow Wilson to convince him to run for Senate as a Democrat. He narrowly lost that race, and although he had support for the presidential bid in 1924, he never ran for office again. Now, in January 1919, Henry Ford began publication of the Dearborn Independent, a small, financially troubled community weekly he had purchased the previous year. The idea of acquiring a newspaper first came to Ford during the anti-war crusade, when he became convinced that a hostile press controlled by banks and other powerful financial interests was campaigning against him. The paper would provide Ford a means to express his own views and to counter the attacks that had been launched against him for the $5 day, his pacifist activist, and his 1918 run for U.S. Senate. That run for Senate, he believed his opponent, Senator Truman H. Newberry, had stolen it from him. Now, carrying this subtitle, The Chronicle of the Negated Truth, the paper primarily served as a forum for Henry Ford's views. Each issue of the Independent carried Mr. Ford's own page, an editorial expressing his opinions. Agents went door to door selling subscriptions, and Ford Motor Company pressured dealers throughout the nation to buy multiple subscriptions and hand out copies to customers. The Dearborn Independent would most likely have remained a sidebar in Ford's biography were it not for the controversial series that began on May 22, 1920, and lasted for several years. Now, appearing on the front page every week, The International Jew, the World's Problem, examined a purported conspiracy launched by Jewish groups to achieve world domination. The basis for the articles were supposedly an ancient and notorious forgery. At least that's what all online inquiries say. Now, he used the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was first published in Russia in 1903. Ford's attitudes toward Jews, along with the views of his staff at the Dearborn Independent, were the major reason for the publication of the International Jew. His beliefs formed along several strands from his upbringing, attitudes, and personal beliefs. They were also influenced by the current populist political sensitivities that advocated a distrust of financiers, bankers, and institutes of economic power. A common stereotype at the time led some people to assume that Jews controlled the international banking system, and that belief may have fed Ford's anti-Jewish feelings. His pacifism probably formed a second strand. His crusade against World War I convinced him that the international Jewish bankers were fomenting the war. Here again, the stereotype at the time may have convinced him that international Jewish bankers supported the war for personal gain. Now lastly, Ford's growing cultural conservatism, anti-urbanism, and nostalgia for the rural past formed an important third strand. Ford saw Jews present in everything that he viewed as modern and distasteful. Contemporary music, movies, theater, new dress styles, and loosening social morals. The publication of the International Jew caused an uproar. In some quarters, such as anti-immigrant and nativist groups, the series confirmed and validated their own beliefs. Others, appalled by the series, published demands for retraction, removed the paper from public libraries, and promoted a boycott of Ford automobiles. Some Ford dealers refused to carry the paper. Responding to the pressure, Ford halted publication of the series in January 1922, only to start it up again less than a year later. Now, in April 1924, the Independent initiated a new series of attacks on attorney Aaron Shapiro, accusing him of exploiting farmers' cooperatives. Now, when Ford refused to print a redaction, Shapiro sued him for libel. The case finally came to trial in March of 1927 and quickly turned into a media circus. Now, shortly before Ford was scheduled to testify, he ordered the closing of the Dearborn Independent. It closed at the end of 1927, and he explored an out-of-court settlement with Shapiro. And after negotiations with U.S. Representative Nathan D. Perelman, who was also a vice president of the American Jewish Congress, along with Lewis Marshall, the president of the American Jewish Committee, Ford agreed to release a formal apology. Now, that was written by Marshall himself. He was also to make a cash settlement with Shapiro. Now, although this seemingly ended a dark chapter in Henry Ford's life, the episode tarnished his reputation, and it has never been completely forgotten. However, to this day, various groups continue to cite Henry Ford's literature to inform and rationalize their behavior and their ideals. Now, let's finish with one of his recorded quotes while the thunder booms around me. I don't know if you can hear it or not. Here's his quote.
Controlling the world's sources of news, Jews can always prepare the minds of people for their next move. The greatest exposure yet to be made is the way news is manufactured and the way in which the mind of whole nations is molded for a purpose. When the powerful Jew is at last traced and his hand revealed, then comes the ready cry of persecution, and it echoes through the world press. The real causes of persecution, which is the oppression of the people by the financial practices of the Jews, are never given publicity.
Just more food for thought.
Thanks for watching this and all our videos. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until we meet again, stay curious, fellow travelers, and have a great day.